They thought the storm had passed, but storms have a way of circling back, darker and more dangerous than before, and for Marcus and Angela Johnson, the glittering victory at the charity gala had felt like closure, like justice had finally silenced the whispers, like their place in the neighborhood was no longer questioned but affirmed, yet they did not see the shadow festering across the street, the man who had once been king watching his crown slip from his head, Richard Kingsley, a man drowning in humiliation, replaying the night again and again, each memory sharper than the last, each laugh, each clap, each cheer for the Johnsons cutting into him like knives, and humiliation, when left unchecked, does not heal, it mutates into obsession, and obsession drives men to destruction. Richard could not rest, he could not breathe without feeling the weight of their victory pressing down on him, so he sharpened his hate into weapons, he hired investigators, pressed his contacts in City Hall, whispered to bankers and politicians, searching for dirt, for cracks, for anything he could use to bring the Johnsons down, and though at first the reports came back clean, the files spotless, the businesses thriving, the taxes pristine, Richard was not the type to stop at walls, he was the type to dig under them, climb over them, or burn them down altogether, and soon he found a thread, small, fragile, but enough to twist into a noose, a charity Marcus's company had once invested in, a charity that collapsed years later in scandal. Though Marcus had pulled out long before the corruption was exposed, Richard did not care about truth, he cared about narrative, and so he began weaving, whispering at cocktail parties, planting stories at the country club, suggesting that maybe the Johnsons' billions were not so clean, maybe their empire was built on deceit, maybe the outsiders they all embraced too quickly were hiding something darker. Rumors spread like smoke, creeping into homes, curling into conversations, until soon neighbors who once clapped for the Johnsons now glanced with doubt, their smiles colder, their voices sharper, and Angela noticed first, she felt the shift like a change in weather, the invitations that stopped arriving, the stares that lingered too long at the grocery store, the neighbors who once waved now turned away. Marcus saw it too, contracts delayed, banks demanding unnecessary documentation, reporters calling with questions about past dealings. They knew it was Richard, of course it was Richard, but Richard was slick, too careful, never naming them outright, always letting someone else carry the poison so that he could stay untouchable. And so the Johnsons endured, silent, watchful, waiting, but even the strongest foundation can feel the pressure of a storm pressing down, until one night Richard struck with full force, bold and brazen, announcing a special community meeting in the same hall where the Johnsons had first been mocked, calling it an open discussion on standards. But his true purpose was clear, he wanted a trial, a public crucifixion, a chance to rip away their dignity in the one place they thought was finally home, and the neighbors came, all of them, whispers filling the room like snakes slithering through grass, some curious, some ready to believe, some already convinced, and when Marcus and Angela arrived, all eyes cut to them, piercing, suspicious, waiting for a spectacle. Richard stood at the front, papers in his hand, voice booming with the confidence of a man who believed his moment had returned. "My friends," he began, his tone dripping with false sincerity, "we have always believed in the highest standards for this neighborhood, but new information has come to light, troubling information, and though I wish it weren't true, it is my duty to share it with you. Concerns about our newest residents, concerns about shady dealings, concerns about the true source of their wealth, concerns that perhaps their empire is not as clean as it seems." And with that he waved the papers dramatically, pausing for effect, gasps rippling through the crowd. "Here is proof of connections to a fraudulent charity, proof of questionable transactions, proof that the Johnsons may not be who they claim to be." Whispers erupted, neighbors muttering, heads turning, doubts spreading like wildfire, and for a moment Richard felt powerful again, standing tall as the room leaned into his performance. But Marcus, calm as ever, rose slowly, every movement deliberate, his voice steady as stone when he spoke. "Richard, you speak of standards and integrity, yet here you stand twisting half-truths into daggers, waving papers that mean nothing without context, misleading your neighbors. Because your pride was wounded at a charity gala? Yes, years ago my company invested in a charity, and when corruption was uncovered we pulled out and helped expose it. That's the truth, not your distortion. You don't know the secret I've uncovered, and when I reveal it, not even your billions will save you." The camera lingers on his clenched hands, on the folder glowing faintly under the dashboard light, the narrator's voice low, heavy with tension. "They thought the storm had passed. What Richard fears is not that we are corrupt, but that we are successful, not that we lack integrity, but that we carry more of it than he ever could. Because real integrity is proven not by tearing others down, but by lifting others up." The room shifted, the crowd uneasy, and then Angela stepped forward, her voice sharp, unyielding, cutting through Richard's performance like a blade. "And since you want to talk about proof, Richard, let's talk about these." She pulled out her own folder, documents clear and undeniable, showing their companies funding scholarships, restoring housing, creating jobs, and at the very top, a check. A donation they had made to the very community center hosting this meeting. This is who we are, builders not destroyers, givers not takers, people who believe that where you come from should never limit where you can go. And the room shifted again, whispers changing, the tide turning, until suddenly applause broke out, small at first but growing, neighbors rising to their feet, clapping not for Richard's hollow accusations but for the Johnsons' truth, the Johnsons' resilience, the Johnsons' strength. Richard's face twisted, his papers slipping from his hand, his plan collapsing, his power evaporating in front of the very people he sought to control, and Marcus looked at him, his eyes steady, his words quiet but sharp as glass. You thought you could bury us, Richard, but you forgot, we are the roots, and roots only grow stronger under pressure. The meeting ended with neighbors embracing the Johnsons, respect restored, trust renewed, justice once again served. Richard left standing in the wreckage of his own lies, his reputation cracked, his crown shattered. But pride is a dangerous thing, and as Marcus and Angela walked home hand in hand, their spirits lightened by vindication, they did not see the shadow waiting, Richard sitting in his car, his face twisted with fury, his hands gripping a manila folder so tightly the edges bent. A folder filled with documents too dangerous, too explosive to reveal just yet, his whisper cutting into the night like a curse. You think you've won, but you don't know what I know. But the darkest clouds had only just gathered. Richard was about to unleash something far more dangerous than rumors, a secret buried deep in the past, a secret so powerful it could shake the very foundation of everything Marcus and Angela had built. And when it surfaced, nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The screen fades to black, leaving the question echoing in the silence. What secret could Richard possibly hold that could destroy giants like the Johnsons? Richard did not sleep that night. How could he, when vengeance pulsed through his veins stronger than blood, when every laugh and clap in that hall still echoed like cruel bells, each one ringing out his humiliation, each one sharpening his hate, and as the Johnsons celebrated their victory hand in hand, believing the storm had passed, Richard sat in his car under the dim streetlight, his eyes locked on the manila folder that trembled in his hands, a folder that held more than papers, it held power, it held a weapon forged not from lies but from truths so twisted by time they now cut sharper than any blade, and he whispered to himself again and again, this will end them forever. For inside that folder was a ghost, a piece of Marcus's past long buried, a decision made decades earlier when he was young, desperate, and hungry to save a dream he could not afford to lose. Back then Marcus had signed papers tied to a shadowy investment group, men who hid corruption behind charitable fronts, men who later went down in flames when federal investigations exposed their empire of fraud. Marcus had cut ties, yes, he had walked away clean, yes, but signatures do not vanish, contracts do not forget, and Richard, through bribes and favors, through nights of digging, had unearthed those very documents that placed Marcus's name alongside men the world now spat on, men whose legacies were prison bars and ruined families, and though Marcus had never stolen, never cheated, never joined their crimes, Richard knew perception is often deadlier than reality. All he needed was to stitch the threads together, to present Marcus not as a visionary but as a man whose fortune began in shadows, whose billions were fertilized in soil tainted with corruption. And so the plot began. Days later the neighborhood buzzed with whispers again, but this time they did not come from Richard's lips. They came from the media, headlines splashing across screens, business icon Marcus Johnson linked to defunct fraudulent charity, articles dripping with speculation, reporters circling like vultures, microphones shoved into faces, cameras blinding in flashes, and the Johnsons, once embraced, now felt the cold sting of betrayal, neighbors whispering again, friends turning distant, colleagues pausing their calls, contracts freezing in mid-signature. Angela stood tall, her eyes fierce, but even she could see the storm Richard had unleashed was unlike the others. It was bigger, louder, and crueler because this time the accusations weren't spun from rumors alone. This time there were documents, contracts, and signatures, evidence that twisted the truth until it looked like guilt. Marcus tried to explain. He stood before reporters, calm, composed, his voice steady as he told the story, how he had been young, how he had believed in saving the business, how he had invested before the fraud was uncovered, how he had pulled out the moment the truth came to light. But the cameras didn't care, the sound bites didn't care, they wanted drama, scandal, downfall, and every word Marcus spoke was sliced apart, taken out of context, turned into fuel for the fire. The pressure mounted, regulators circling, banks questioning, investors pulling back, and for the first time in years Marcus felt the walls closing in, the life he built trembling beneath his feet. Angela held him, whispered strength into him, reminded him of who he was, reminded him that truth stands taller than lies, but even she felt the weight pressing down heavier each day, until one evening as they sat in their home surrounded by silence, their lawyer arrived pale-faced, papers in his hand. "Marcus?" "Angela, it's worse than we thought. Richard has more. He's not stopping at the charity. He's found something deeper, something buried in the contracts from decades ago, something tied to a project your father signed, Marcus, and if he reveals it, it won't just damage your name, it could destroy everything. Your businesses, your legacy, even your freedom." The words hit like bullets, Marcus stunned, Angela trembling, because the lawyer would not even say what the secret was, only that it was devastating, only that Richard now held a knife to their throats and he would not hesitate to use it. Across town Richard stood in his glass tower, staring out over the city like a king returned to his throne, his lips curling into a smile as he poured himself a drink, the folder lying open on his desk, documents spread like trophies, his whisper sharp and venomous. "This time they won't rise, this time they won't survive, because I won't just ruin their reputation, I'll ruin their name, their history, their bloodline." His laughter echoing against the glass, cold and hollow. But storms do not only belong to those who create them, storms belong to the sky, and the sky is unpredictable, because even as Richard prepared his next strike, forces beyond his control were moving, people he underestimated, allies the Johnsons did not yet know they had, gathering quietly, watching closely, ready to turn the tide when the moment was right. Yet for now, the Johnsons stood on the edge of ruin, their empire trembling, their trust tested, their strength pushed to the brink, and as the camera lingers on Marcus's face in the dim glow of his study, his hands gripping the old papers, his jaw set, his voice a whisper carved from steel. "If Richard wants war, then war is what he'll get." The narrator's voice lowers, heavy with anticipation. They had survived lies, they had survived envy, but what Richard now held was no ordinary weapon. It was a secret that cut through time itself, a secret buried so deep it threatened not just their present but their past, a secret that could unravel everything they had built. And when Richard revealed it, the world would not only question the Johnsons' fortune, it would question their very right to exist in the halls of power they had fought so hard to enter. The screen fades to black, the silence heavy, the question burning, what is the devastating secret in Richard's hands, and will Marcus and Angela find the strength to withstand a storm that threatens not just their empire but their very legacy? The storm broke not with thunder but with headlines, flashing across every screen, pouring from every speaker. Richard's trap sprung in full force. Marcus Johnson family fortune tied to fraudulent legacy. The articles blazed, and this time it wasn't just Marcus's name, it was his bloodline, his very roots, because Richard had dug deeper than anyone thought possible into archives long forgotten, into contracts signed by Marcus's late father during a desperate era when survival mattered more than reputation, and there it was, black ink on yellowed paper, the signature of Samuel Johnson on documents tying him to the very syndicate of fraudulent investors who had later been exposed in one of the largest financial scandals of a generation. It was Samuel's name alongside men who would later rot in prison. It was Samuel's company listed as a beneficiary of deals that collapsed into ashes. And though Samuel had died years before the investigations reached their height, though Marcus had long since built his empire on clean ground, Richard's revelation painted the Johnson name with corruption's brush, staining not just the son but the father, not just the man but the legacy, and suddenly it was everywhere, news anchors questioning, commentators sneering, neighbors whispering, and even allies stepping back in fear of association. The Johnsons' empire quaked under the weight of a ghost they never summoned. Marcus stood frozen as the papers spread across the table, his father's name bold, undeniable, Angela at his side, her hand trembling against his. "It's not true, Marcus, it doesn't change who you are, it doesn't change what we've built." But Marcus's eyes were clouded with pain because he knew his father, he knew the desperation that once consumed him, the years of drought, of banks slamming doors, of land slipping away, and he remembered the whispered conversations late at night when Samuel had said, "Son, sometimes you sign papers you don't believe in just to keep the lights on," and now those papers had come back like ghosts to haunt the living. Richard did not wait, he pounced, calling another community gathering, not of neighbors this time but of the press, city officials, even federal investigators he had nudged with his evidence, and he stood at the podium tall, confident, triumphant. "My friends, my city, I warned you. The Johnsons are not who they claim to be, they pretend to be philanthropists, they pretend to be builders, but the truth is they stand on the bones of corruption, their fortune fertilized by deceit, their name forever tied to fraud, and integrity cannot grow from poisoned roots. Tonight I reveal the truth, tonight the mask comes off." He slammed the papers down, cameras flashing, gasps rippling through the hall, the trap seemingly complete. But Marcus did not shrink, Marcus did not crumble. Marcus walked to the podium, slow, deliberate, Angela at his side, the crowd shifting, the tension thick enough to choke, and his voice, though quiet, carried like thunder. "You're right, Richard, those signatures are real. My father signed those papers when I was just a boy. He signed them because the farm was dying, because the banks had turned their backs, because he refused to let his children go hungry. And yes, those men he signed with turned out to be liars, thieves, frauds. But my father was not one of them. He never took a dime that wasn't earned, he never stole, he never cheated, and when the truth came out, he was already gone from this world, unable to defend himself. So let me defend him now." Samuel Johnson was a man of honor who made a desperate choice in desperate times, but from that choice I learned something, Richard. I learned that true wealth cannot be inherited, it must be built, and every dollar I've made, every business I've grown, every scholarship and home and community I've funded, stands as proof that I did not build on corruption, I built on resilience, on sacrifice, on character. And while you wave papers of the past to chain me to shadows, I stand here free because integrity is not about never stumbling, it's about rising stronger when you do. And Richard, you will never understand that because you've never built, you've only destroyed. The crowd stirred, murmurs turning, reporters leaning in, but it was Angela who struck the final blow, stepping forward, her voice fierce as fire. "And since you want to talk about legacies, Richard, let's talk about yours. Because while my husband's father signed papers in desperation, your family signed contracts dripping with greed, and we have the proof too." She raised her folder, flipping it open, exposing documents of Richard's own father tied to failed developments, lawsuits buried, workers left unpaid, investors defrauded, documents Richard thought hidden, buried in archives Angela's quiet investigators had uncovered while Richard obsessed with theirs. "You call our roots poisoned, Richard, but look at your own. Your empire built on lies you tried to hide, and the only reason you point at us is because you hope no one will look at you," gasps erupted, cameras flashing faster now, the room exploding with shock, Richard's face pale, his hands trembling, his mouth opening but no words coming because the truth had finally reversed, the spotlight shifted, his mask torn away, his own corruption naked for the world to see. And then Marcus leaned close, his voice low but deadly clear. "You wanted a war, Richard, but wars reveal more than they destroy. And tonight everyone sees the truth. You were never our enemy because you never stood at our level, you were only a mirror of envy cracking under its own reflection." The room erupted in applause, the Johnsons lifted higher than ever, Richard collapsing under the weight of his own hatred, reporters swarming, officials closing in, his empire trembling like glass ready to shatter. And in that moment the tables did not just turn, they collapsed, leaving Richard exposed, powerless, broken. Later that night, as Marcus and Angela walked home hand in hand once more, their neighbors cheering, their names restored, Angela whispered, "Funny how the truth always rises," and Marcus replied, "Funny how envy always falls." Their SUV gleaming in the streetlights, the storm finally passing, the dawn breaking on a new chapter, and the narrator's voice settled like a final note, heavy with wisdom. Richard Kingsley thought humiliation was the end. He thought revenge was the answer. But envy is a fire that consumes only the one who carries it. And while he burned, Marcus and Angela stood unshaken, proof that dignity outlasts deceit, that character outlives corruption, and that the greatest power of all is not money or influence, but truth. And so the war ended, not with destruction, but with revelation, not with the Johnsons ruined, but with them standing taller than ever, their legacy sealed not in ink or rumor, but in the lives they lifted, the storms they survived, and the enemies they turned into lessons for the world to see.